Hey everyone, welcome to Mind Unboxed, the channel where we unpack the most profound, weird, and reality-shattering discoveries about the human brain and consciousness. Today we're exploring one of the most astonishing chapters in neuroscience, the split brain experiments, the studies that revealed what happens when doctors literally cut the brain in half, severing the connection between the left and right hemispheres. The findings were so bizarre that they earned Roger Sperry the Nobel Prize in 1981, and forced us to completely rethink the nature of the self, consciousness, and free will. It all started in the 1940s and 1950s, when neurosurgeons William van Wagenen and Philip Vogel began performing a radical operation called corpus callosotomy on patients with life-threatening, drug-resistant epilepsy. Severe epileptic seizures often spread like wildfire from one hemisphere to the other through the corpus callosum, the massive bridge of over 200 million nerve fibers that connects the left and right sides of the brain, allowing them to communicate and coordinate. By cutting this bridge, surgeons could confine seizures to one hemisphere, dramatically reducing their frequency and intensity. The procedure saved lives, and surprisingly, at first glance, patients seemed remarkably normal afterward. They walked, talked, behaved like themselves. Most reported no obvious change in personality or intellect. But in the early 1960s, a young neuroscientist named Roger Sperry, working with his student Michael Gazzaniga at Caltech, decided to test these patients more carefully. They designed a series of ingenious experiments to present information separately to each isolated hemisphere and see how each half responded independently. Here's why that was possible. Our visual system is wired in a crossed way. Everything you see in your left visual field goes to your right hemisphere, and everything in your right visual field goes to your left hemisphere. Normally, the corpus callosum instantly shares that information so both sides know everything. But in split brain patients, the two hemispheres are now informationally isolated. The researchers used a tachistoscope, a device that flashes images very briefly to one visual field at a time, and asked patients to fixate on a central point. They could show a different picture to each hemisphere simultaneously without the other side knowing. The results were jaw-dropping. First, they discovered that in almost all right-handed people, and most left-handers, language is overwhelmingly dominant in the left hemisphere. When an object, say a spoon, was flashed to the right visual field, left hemisphere, the patient could easily name it out loud and describe it. But when the same spoon was flashed only to the left visual field, right hemisphere, the patient would insist they saw nothing at all, because the speaking left hemisphere had no access to the information. Yet when asked to reach with their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, into a bag of objects, and pick out what they had just not seen, they would correctly grab the spoon every time. The right hemisphere knew perfectly well what it saw. It just couldn't speak. In one famous experiment, a picture of a naked woman was flashed to the left visual field, right hemisphere, of a female patient. She blushed and giggled, but when asked why, said she had no idea. The left hemisphere hadn't seen the image. Then she said, "Oh, that sneaky machine," her left brain trying to rationalize the emotional reaction it detected but couldn't explain. Another patient was shown two different words simultaneously: walk to the right hemisphere and key to the left. The speaking left hemisphere said it saw key, but moments later, the patient stood up and started walking. When asked why, the left hemisphere confidently invented an explanation. "I'm going to get a drink." The left brain, unaware of the walk command, fabricated a plausible reason for the behavior it observed. These confabulations showed something profound. The left hemisphere is not just the language center, it's also the interpreter, the storyteller that constructs coherent narratives about why we do what we do, even when it doesn't actually know. Over hundreds of experiments, a clear picture emerged of hemispheric specialization. The left hemisphere is analytic, verbal, logical, sequential. It excels at language, math, and step-by-step reasoning. It's the part that speaks and dominates conscious awareness in most people. The right hemisphere is holistic, visuospatial, emotional, nonverbal. Superior at recognizing faces, understanding metaphors, grasping overall context, and processing music and spatial relationships. It has some limited language comprehension, but almost no speech production. Crucially, each hemisphere has its own perceptions, memories, intentions, and, according to some interpretations, its own stream of consciousness. In one chilling demonstration, researchers simultaneously presented conflicting commands: walk to the right hemisphere and stay to the left. The patient stood up to walk, but halfway across the room, the left hemisphere took over and forced the body back to the chair, the two halves literally fighting for control of the single body. Gazzaniga later described split brain patients as having two separate spheres of consciousness, sharing one skull. When he asked one patient's left hemisphere if the right hemisphere had its own consciousness, it confidently replied, no, of course, because it couldn't communicate with it. But the right hemisphere, when tested non-verbally, demonstrated preferences, emotions, and even beliefs that sometimes differed from the left. For example, in some patients, the right hemisphere indicated belief in God when asked via pointing, while the speaking left hemisphere declared atheism. Philosophically, these findings exploded traditional ideas about the unity of self. We like to think of I as a single, indivisible consciousness. But the split brain experiments suggested that the feeling of unity is an illusion created by constant communication between hemispheres. Cut that communication, and two relatively independent minds emerge, each capable of perception, memory, learning, and willed action. Does this mean we all have two consciousnesses that are normally fused into one? Some neuroscientists argue yes, that the corpus callosum creates the illusion of a single self from two parallel processing streams. Others say the right hemisphere's consciousness is more limited, and the left remains the primary seat of unified awareness. Either way, the implications are staggering. If two minds can coexist in one brain without knowing about each other, what does that say about free will, personal identity, and the nature of the I that we feel so certain about? Most split-brain patients live remarkably normal lives, because everyday tasks involve both hemispheres through external cues. Seeing your own hand move, hearing your voice, feeling your body. The two halves reintegrate behavior through the environment. Only in carefully controlled lab settings does the split become obvious. Today, full corpus callosotomy is rarely performed. Better drugs and focused surgeries have replaced it. But the legacy of those patients, and Sperry and Gazzaniga's work, endures as one of the most direct windows into the modular nature of the mind. The split-brain experiments didn't just treat epilepsy, they cracked open the skull and showed us that the unified you might be more fragile, more constructed, and far stranger than anyone ever imagined. Two minds, one body, one brain, divided consciousness. That's the incredible story of the split-brain experiments, the discovery that inside every human skull there might be more than one you. If this video split your sense of self or blew your mind in half, let me know in the comments. Which hemisphere do you think is in charge of you right now? If you want more deep dives into the strangest frontiers of neuroscience and consciousness, smash that like button, subscribe to Mind Unboxed, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay connected, at least across your own hemispheres. See you in the next one.